Hey guys, it's Sam for Digital Meat. You may have noticed my channel's been a bit quiet over the last week, and that's because I've been ill. But I'm feeling a little bit better now, so hopefully the tutorials will start flowing again. Okay, so in this tutorial, I wanted to look at trying to get a microscopic look and effect, and if you know anything about, let's have a look. Let's create up some images for you. So yeah, this kind of look is like an electron microscope. It's this kind of thing. There's one example. There's another one. Ooh, some kind of parasitic worm or something. And this kind of thing. So I've been playing around with that, and I've managed to get this look. So I'll just play this for you. So it looks like some kind of spore or something with particulates floating by. So that's the kind of look that I was trying to get. And that's what we're going to be doing in this tutorial. So let's just jump straight into it. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to need is the actual microscopic spore thing itself. So let's create a sphere. I'm going to view its lines. Also, I'm going to make it a hexahedron as well. So that I've done this because with the normal sphere you get pinching at the top and bottoms. So you get pinching there and there, and we're going to be displacing this sphere, so we don't want any pinching. So hexahedron's fine, and we're going to give it quite a lot of segments as well, so maybe 100. So it's got quite a bit, and I'm going to shrink this down so the radius is 1 centimetre, so that is pretty tiny. And the reason that I've done that is because if I leave it at a large size, what was it originally, 200 or so, 100 centimetres, so that's a metre radius. Yeah, so its entire width is 2 meters. And now to get the depth of field effects with those little particulates, you're going to have to work harder with the camera. So scale is important for that kind of thing, because it is a physically based camera. So let's shrink this back down to 1 and see what we got. Lovely. Okay. I'm also going to need a floor, so I'm just going to create a plane. And this, because the camera angle is going to be quite tight, this doesn't need to be that big actually. This can be 30 by 30 centimeters, something like that. And the segments really don't matter, so we can get rid of that. Okay. Excellent. Right. So let's bring our sphere up slightly. Let's go to the side view so it's sitting on our ground. So there we go. That should do us fine. Okay. So excuse me. We want to displace our sphere. Okay, so let's create a displacer. Where is it? Displacer. There it is. Put it under our sphere. And we're going to need to use a noise to displace it. So if we go to shading, it's using the custom shader, which is what we want to use. Drop down the shader and we'll choose noise. And as you can see, it's deformed our sphere, but not necessarily in the way we want it to. So I'm going to go into the noise itself. I'm quite happy with using noise, but I'm going to shrink down the global scale. So let's give it, I don't know, 1.5%, something like that. Okay, so we're getting more of the result that we want, but the actual displacement strength is way too strong. So let's go into this displacement, go to object, and you can see here the height is 10 centimeters, and our object itself is only 1 centimeter radius. So we can shrink this down to maybe 0.1. There we go. That's a lot more like what we want. So we've already got the beginnings of what we need this thing to do. But we also want the texture to be animated. And at present, when we hit play, I'm gonna put 10 seconds on the clock. Okay. You probably don't even need that much, to be honest, but if I play it, nothing's happening. So if we go into the shading, go into the noise, and go to this animation speed, we can actually put that to 1. And now when we play, we get this kind of movement. So you can choose whatever you want that to be, but that's what I'm having. Okay. Textures. So the well, let me just drag that out of the way and create a new material. Sorry, I've got another iteration of Cinema open. So for the floor, we are going to want something, aren't we? So we don't need the reflection. I think I did this in the color, but you could do it in the luminance, I suppose. But in this texture, I'm going to add another noise. And I think if we go inside this noise, we can actually change these values. So it's let's have a look. Okay, so this white is, I don't think we need it as bright as that. Let me just copy over what I had. Okay, so what do we want here? Yeah, I reckon something like this. Nothing too bright, but nothing too dark either. So around there. But what we do want to do is actually change the this to UV 2D, so it actually follows the UVs of the floor. So let's actually just apply this to our floor, and that's what we're getting so far. We also want to I'm going to change its relative scale down to 5%, 5%, 5%. And I'm also going to mess with the low clip. So I'm going to bring this up to about 70%, something like that. So as you can see now, we've got kind of this like spotty, darty texture. And I'm going to change the animation speed to 2 as well. Now if we hit play, there's not much going on with the floor, and that's because we need to go to the editor and animate preview. And we can also actually change the preview size, so yeah, it's a little bit more visible now. So if we play that back, we're getting this kind of effect, and that'll be great for sort of the background of what's going on. I don't think there's anything else I actually need to do in this material. We've got a really black background. Yeah, everything seems fine to me. So that's it for the floor material. So I'm actually going to, just so we can keep things organised, I'm going to actually name this floor. So I'm not going to be using it on anything else. And also I'm going to call this plain floor as well. Okay. Yeah, now for the material of our kind of spore-like object. Now for this, I was looking for a way to get that sort of like electron microscope look, and I ended up using Cheen material, and it's actually quite clever really. So if you go to new material or shader, actually, yeah, we can choose Cheen and we get this kind of thing. But what I actually did was I went to the content browser and took a Cheen material that's already in there. So if I go to Window, with the content browser, you'll go to here, go to presets, and then the search thing at the top, and you can see that I've already got it in there. Search Cheen, and it gave this kind of thing. And there's one called Cheen Electron, and this blue one here. So I'm just going to double click on that and bring that in. Get rid of the other Cheen that I had, and I'm going to open this up, and we're going to change some values for this thing. Okay, so we've got these gradient things which define the look of the material itself. This one's white, so I'm going to leave that there, and this one I'm also going to change to white, I think, just so we've got this going on. And this last one here, I'm actually going to... Oh, wait a minute. I don't think that was white, actually. I think... Yeah, actually, I think it was that one. And then this one, I'm just going to take all the colour out of it, so it's desaturated. So now we've kind of got this black and white thing going on. So let's try applying that to our object. There we go, and I suppose give it a little render. Okay, so that looks a little bit weird, and the reason for that is because in the material, it's our roughness channel. We need to tweak some of the settings in there. So go back to the roughness. So the type of roughness is fine, so is the amplitude and the octaves and all that kind of stuff. It's the scale that's the issue. So if we shrink this down to 0.5%, I think that should actually, I think that's all we need to do. So if we render again, now you can see we've got that sort of microbial kind of look, which is exactly what we're going for. Let me just check that that's correct. I don't think we need to alter the clips or anything like that. No, that's fine then. So that's our material sorted out for our sphere. So we've got our ground in place and we've got our sphere in place. Let's just create a camera. Create a camera. Its position is going to be wherever the view position was, but because I've made this scene previously, I'm going to actually input the coordinates of my camera from my other scene, so it's the same. So for the X position, I'm going to change that to 8.809 and press enter. Oh, and it's changed. Let's have a look. So we're both world. Okay, so up here I'm going to go minus 3.339. Here I'm going to go minus 1.872, and for the last one that is going to be 2.285. So that's the camera's position sorted out. Let's just zoom into it. Okay, yeah, and then we're going to sort out the rotation as well. So I think that was 53,609. So I'm just going to copy and paste that in. And for the pitch, we've got like minus 31 something. Okay, so that's the view that we've got. Now, if I actually go into my camera, you can see that we're actually going through the floor there. And there's a reason for that. It's because of the focal length. So that'll be why that's happening. But we're gonna sort that out in a minute. And the reason that we're going to adjust the focal length is so we can get the desired effect for the field of view. Now, the only way that we're going to test whether the field of view is correct or not is, well, first of all, we definitely know that it's not right because the front of the camera has been rammed through the floor. So I'm going to actually adjust what those options are now. So if we go into the Object tab of Physical Camera, the focal length is currently set to 36, but I'm going to choose a normal lens, which is 50mm, and as you can see, that already changed the focal length of the camera. So that's 50mm, and the what else do we need to do? The field of view. Okay, so right. You can see that the f-stop, if we go to the physical tab, the f-stop is greyed out, and that's because we haven't turned on depth of field yet, so we don't get to get this option. this is what controls our depth of field as well as exposure if we've got that ticked on, but we're not going to worry about that. But the general rule is the lower the f-stop, the more severe the depth of field effect is. So if we go into our render settings, we can set that up now. So let's do that. So let's go into our render settings. I'm just going to choose the physical renderer, go into physical. For now, I'm just going to go to leave it on adaptive and change it to automatic, and change the shading error threshold down to 15%. And as you can see at the top, we've got depth of field and motion blur. I'm going to whack depth of field on. So now we've got, you can see this f-stop value's been unlocked. Okay, so this camera could actually do with being moved back slightly, I think. So we've got something more akin to that. So let's go into our camera and see what we've got. Okay, that's more like it. But we could probably do with shifting the view up. It depends what kind of output we've got. So if we go into our render settings, go into the output, we can see we've got a 16:9. I'm going to actually change this to a 1080, 24 frames a second. That should do us, and we're just going to keep it on current frame for now, just so we can test what our thing looks like. So as you can see, it's very blurred out, and that's because of the focal range of our camera. So if you go back into our camera, go back to object, and then we've got this focus distance. We can actually set it via numbers here, but we can click on this and actually just click on our object, and now it's a lot more in view, but you can see that it's blurred out the background and all this kind of stuff. So we can actually tweak this by going into the f-stop of our camera and actually raise this up. We can put this up to 15 and give that a go. So it's a lot more subtle of an effect, but it's there all the same. So if I just shift this camera so it's like this, so you know it's more centralized, that's good. And maybe pull the camera back a little bit as well. Now is this, nope. We want it in local space, so let's come out the camera and just pull it back ever so slightly and then go back in. Okay, yeah, something like that. That should do us, maybe a little bit more. Okay, and obviously because we've moved the camera's position now, our focal length has changed, so we can go back in, go to our object tab and pick our object again and give it another quick render. Yeah, so there we go. Now you can see that there's a lot of grain in the depth of field, and that's because of our shading quality. So if we go into our physical render settings, it's because of this shading error threshold here. But while we're working, I'm going to keep that as is, because it just means when we render to test, it will happen quicker. And that's what we want. We want to keep this nice and zippy. So let's just move this down a little bit. Okay, that should do us. I'm quite happy with the camera position now, so I'm going to select the camera, right click on it and go to Semaphore D tags and go down to protection. And this way it locks everything. So even if I'm in my camera and I wanted to move, it won't let me. I can't mess up my camera view. Okay, so now we've got everything we need in place now. We've got the camera, we've got the thing, and we just need to get our floaties going by. And I'm going to do that by animating some particles on a path. So what I'm going to need is I'm going to need a cloner object. So let's create a cloner, and that can just go down the bottom. And I'm also going to need a path for this thing to be traveling on. I'm going to create a spline. So I'm going to go up to the pen tool. I'm going to make sure this is set to linear, and I'm just going to create 2 points like this. So we've got our spline there now, and because I've done this before in another scene, I'm just going to take the values for that scene for the points of each of the spline. So I'm just going to copy those in. So I've got this value for the X, so I'm going to put that in. I've got this value for the Y, so I'm going to put that in. And I've got this value for the Z. So I'm going to put that in there. Okay, so that stretches off. And now for the other point. So this point's X. So basically we just need it perpendicular to the camera. But obviously you guys can handle that yourself. It just needs to be a straight line going across the camera's view and spreading off into the distance in either directions. Not by much. It just needs to go far enough for so it's out of the camera's shot. So what we should end up with is a spline that travels across like this. That's all we're looking for. I'm sure you can see that there. In fact, I'm going to turn that floor off for a minute because it'll make things harder to see. And I'm going to also hide the camera so there's not so much going on, and the displacer actually, we can hide that. So this is what we want between the camera and our ball on the floor. So if I go back into the camera, that's what we've got. Okay, so now for our floaties. I'm going to create a disc. Let's go and create a disc. Okay, obviously if I come out of the camera, this is what we've got. It's far too big, so I'm going to actually make the outer radius something tiny actually, because let's take it to 0.1 and see what we get. Okay, something like that. Okay, also the segments are way too much. We don't need that many. We can actually make the rotation segment 6, and we can make the disc segments 1. So this is what we're looking to create, this tiny little thing like that. Okay, so we want that disc to be under our cloner, so let's put that in our cloner, make it a child of it. Let's go back into our camera view, and our cloner settings, well, we want the disc to be cloned along that path, so we need to select our cloner. We need to change it from linear to object, and the object that we're going to be cloning along is our spline. So we're going to drag our spline into this. So now we've got these discs travelling along it. And you can see at the moment the count is 10. I'm actually going to whack that up to 500. So now we have this. A little bit mad. But, you know. Also, if we go to our disc now as well and change its orientation to plus X, it actually faces us, kind of thing. So obviously that's not what we want. We want something a little bit more, a little bit better than that. So let's have a look at our clone options again. Let's make sure that we've got everything as we need it. So we want these clones to move, and as you can see at the moment, not much is happening with them. And that's where we're going to fix that by turning this rate up. So if I change this rate to 5%, you can see now they're moving along the spline, which is great. But we need to spread them out a little bit. So if we select our cloner and go up to Mograph, Effector, Random Effector, and we're just going to hide the thing so it's not distracting. You can see already that these things are being pushed off. But what we want to do is we want to create a field of these objects in between the camera, which I've got turned off again, so I'll turn that back on. Yeah, between the camera and this ball, but moving along this spline here. So obviously these values on the random effector are way too much overkill. So what do we want to randomize? Well, let's go to the, not the effector, the parameter. Let's go to the parameter first of all. Right, at the moment we've got position turned on, which we want, but we do not want these values. They're way too high. So for X, I'm going to go 3, and for Y, I'm going to go 2, and for the Z, I'm going to go 2 as well. So now you can see that we've got this this field between us and the ball. But if we go back in, that's a little bit too much, I think. I'm also going to change the scale as well. So turn on scale, we're going to go for uniform scale. I'm going to change this value to, I don't know, 1.81. Okay, so they're, you know, they're bigger and smaller in all kinds of fancy different ways. So that's good. I think the disk size is a little bit too big. How big did I make it? I put it at 0.1, and it needs to be much smaller than that. So let's go 0.025. So there we go. We're getting something a little bit more like it now. And if I come out, we can see that, yeah, we've got this nice kind of star field going on. There's something else I need to do with the random effector as well, and that is the rotation. So we're going to put a bit of rotation into these, some random rotation. So let's put 25 degrees, 38. These are arbitrary numbers, really. You can just change these until you get something you like. So now it's a little bit more random. So let's try rendering that. So now we're getting something a little bit more like it. These things in the foreground in the camera are being blurred out, and let's actually go to our camera and have a look at the settings for that. So I think we've got objects set up exactly the way we want, and in the physical tab, which is controlling everything else, I think that's everything we need as well. But yeah, as you can see, that these things are being blurred out and they look good, but there's a lot of grain in there, and that is essentially to do with our render settings. So let's have a look at our render settings and go down to physical. So we've got adaptive, automatic, but yeah, like I said earlier, is this shading error threshold. This needs to come right down. We need it to work harder. So I want to put it at 2.5% and see what kind of result we get for that. Okay, so it's definitely taken longer, but look, it's cleaned up that mess. It really has cleaned up all those grainy bits and bobs. We're still getting a little bit there, but it's nowhere near as bad as it was. Something else we can do in the physical tab as well, we can whack up this chromatic aberration, and that's basically, how do I describe it? It's actually a fault with the lens in a camera. But we as humans are so used to seeing it that you know, we associate it with realism. But it's actually it's a flaw with the camera. But if we whack this up to 75%, something like that, you'll see that what happens is it actually separates out the colours. So here we go. We're getting this kind of effect now. It separates out the blue and the red. But I think it looks quite nice. So yeah, we can leave that on. Should we get our floor back as well? I turned it off, so let's turn our floor back on and render it with the floor, and you'll see that we're kind of getting the floor with its kind of noisy, spotty thing going on in the background, as well as our floaties on top. So everything's kind of working out there. I'm just going to turn the floor off again so we can see what's going on with our floaties. And if we hit play, they are animating, which is great. But if you remember in my animation, there was a little bit more realism to this, and that is essentially because of something that I did with the dynamics. So first of all, I'm going to turn my floor back on and come out the camera briefly. I don't think the floor needs to be on, to be honest, but the floor needs to become a collider. So I'm going to right click on the floor, go to simulation tags and make it a collider body. I think that's all I need to do, apart from if I click on the rigid body tag on the floor and go to collision. We can leave it on automatic, that's fine, but we want to give the floor 0 bounce and friction quite high, 85, something like that, and that'll do us for the floor. We also need to put one on our sphere as well. So if I right click on the sphere, simulation tag, rigid body, we've got one on there now as well. But there's a few things that we need to do on the tag for our ball. If I just press play now, it's going to do this and roll away. That's no good for us. So we're going to need to change some things on the collision. First of all, the shape isn't automatic. It's going to be a moving mesh because it's been displaced. We've got these bumps all over it. So we want those to be taken into account. So now we're getting this kind of movement. But as you can notice, it is floating above the floor for some reason, which is very, very strange. And it's probably because of our collision margin. So you can see here that it says margin that's grayed out, but if we click on use and then come down here and give it a value of 0.05, it should be a lot closer to the floor now. So let's have a look at that. Yeah, it's actually on it now, which is great, and it's kind of bumbling around. And from the camera's perspective, that's okay, but we kind of want it to keep relatively in the middle of our shot and not to roll off. So there's something we can actually do for that as well. First of all, we can affect these settings down here. So again, we can take the bounce to 0 so it doesn't bumble around too much, and take the friction up to 85, and let's see what effect that had. Okay, it's still sort of bouncing around. Oh, and it's gone through the floor, and it's probably because of the steps in our scene. So what we really want to do is actually go to our project settings, so we can just press the up arrow there and just keep going until we get to project. And if we go to the dynamics tag here, we can go to the expert tab first of all, and we can actually crank up the steps per frame setting. So if we make this 10 and we make this 20, that should solve a lot of our noise issues. Okay, so it's having more to calculate, but it's calculating a lot more accurately now. But there's something else we can also do as well. Let's get back to our sphere tab. There was another setting that I started to mess with. I could put its mass up actually, but if we go to the force tab, we can see this follow position value. If I put this up to 5, it will want to stick to its original position. So if I play now, it kind of just sort of, do you know what I mean? Moves around, but it's still remaining in the center of the screen, largely. Okay, so that's good. Oh, the other thing that I did as well, if we go back to the project settings, I turned off gravity as well. So it's got a little bit of movement to it. So if we go into Dynamics General, and this is going to help our particles. So I set this to 0, I think. So now you can see that the ball's not really moving at all. So let's put the gravity back to what it was. Reset to default. There we go. So let's play it now. Okay, yeah, so we're back to bumbling around on the floor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this until it gets to a point that I like. That'll do. And then go to our sphere rigid body tag even, go to dynamics, and then we've got this set initial state. So I'm going to click that there, and when we rewind, it should be on the floor doing its thing at that location. So that's fine. And now I can go back and turn the gravity off, so at least we know it's got contact with the floor. There we go. So we've got a little bit of movement now. Yeah, that seems fine to me. Good stuff. So that's the ball's movement, the spore or whatever you want to call it. That's its movement sorted out. And I think we got the animation on the displacer as well, haven't we? Did we do that? Yeah, we did. Okay, cool. That's good then. So we've got a little bit of movement there. But I also want these spores to be dynamic. I want them to be able to, when they hit this ball, that they actually have some action going on as well. So on our cloner, I'm going to add another rigid body tag. And remember, there's no gravity in the scene now, so they're not just going to fall to the floor, which is good. So simulation, rigid body, and there's a few settings we need to change in here as well. Okay, so first of all, the collision. They're set to automatic. That's going to be acceptable for this, that's fine. But we need to change this individual elements to all. And that's all we need to do. I don't think there's anything else we particularly need. No, that should be fine. But our scene is probably going to chug a little, because now there's quite a lot going on in it. But you can see that they're interacting with that, which is great. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to cache the whole scene. I'm sure you know that if you go to these the dynamics tags, you can go to the cache and you can say bake object, but you can also bake all. So I think that does all the tags. So let's try that. Okay, so our bake's done now. We've baked all the dynamics in our scene. That's why these icons have changed. So hopefully we'll get a more smoother playback in the scene now. And we have, so that's good. Yeah, everything looks like it should do. We've got a couple of bits that are interacting and flying off, yeah. So if we pause it there and give it a little render, we can see what the final outcome is going to look like. Yeah, I'd say that looks pretty smart. That's all right. Still a bit of grain on these, but again, you can clean those up. I think what we could do actually is change some of the other settings as well. So what we got? 536. We could probably change this from automatic to high, something like that. That might help us. Give it another render and see if it cleaned up any of that grain. Oh yeah, it's greatly improved. Let's see this one up here, because I know there was one up here that had a little bit of yeah, a lot cleaner. Small amount of grain there, but when this is animating, it's not going to be something you're going to notice. That seems to have cleared up quite a lot as well. So that seems acceptable for me. Still a bit of grain there. Maybe that's how it's meant to be though. Yeah, so that looks fine. So now we've got everything going on. We've got our animation and everything else. But there is one more thing that we need to do. And that's the material for our discs. I mean, they look okay. They're, like I said, they're blurred out anyway. So I doubt you're going to sort of see the difference really. But just so they don't all look the same and they're not so uniform, we can actually change the material for this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a normal material. So we've got this new material here. I'll just double click in there, open this up. Let's give this a name as well. Let's give it floaties. That'll do. And I am not going to need the reflectance or the color actually. I'm just going to need the luminance channel. So inside the luminance, I am going to create a gradient. So let's create a gradient, and it gives us this, and go inside the gradient, and I'm going to change this to a 2D circular gradient. So we've got this, but we want it to be the other way around. We want this, oops, just Control Z. We want this up this end and this up the other end. So we're kind of more like this. But we kind of want to cut off the edges. So I'm going to drag this little thing back a little bit just to choke off the edges. And we can also change this center point as well. I want it to be quite bright, so we could put this quite near the top. So that's fine for us, but I want to add a little bit of turbulence as well. So if we start to turn this up, we can see that it starts disturbing the edge of this. So we've got a bit more of an interesting shape. So 20%. Looks like it could be all right for me. Drag that back in a little bit, maybe, just so it doesn't fall off the edge. Yeah, that looks good. And just make sure it's bright. Okay, so that looks good to me. We'll come out of luminance. Now, the problem with this is, well, let's just apply it to our floaties. Let's grab this and put it on our cloner with our discs. And I'm going to turn off the floor just for a second, just so you can see what I'm going on about. And maybe, actually, turn off our depth of field as well, because I want you to see an issue that might occur. Okay, so, especially when these are in front of our spore here, yep, you can definitely see it here. You can see that there's a black edge, there's a black rim to all of our discs, and we don't want that. So what we're going to need to do in our floaty material is actually go into Lumen's channel and right click where it says texture here and copy our gradient, and then go down to alpha and click that on and paste it here. And so you can see this is what it's done. So let's try rendering this again and have a look. And you can see that we're still getting, you know, it's not so bad, but we're still, let's try and get a big one of these in front of our, there we go. Let's try that. So you might notice there's a little bit of a rim on this, and it's because the image alpha is clicked on. We don't need that. If we tick that off, that should help clean it up. And that's because this isn't an image. It's been, well, it's kind of been generated within Cinema 4D. So yeah, you know, it seems cleaner. So that is it. That is basically our material for our floaties. So now we can turn our floor back on, go back to physical and turn our depth of field on. And because it's an animation, we could turn motion blur on as well. If we go to anti-aliasing, you can see that the filters for cubic still image, but obviously this is an animation, so Gauss animation. Although you can pick of all kinds of things there, but I'm going to leave it at that. And yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. So we've got the material for our spore, we've got the material for our floaties. They seem a little bit more subtle now as well, actually. Let's have a look at that. Yeah, and we've got a material for our floor as well, which is animated. So it's all animated. So there we go. And especially as this is animated, these floaties that have been sort of blurred out by the depth of field, they're going to add a lot more atmosphere when you've got the animation running, because as you can see, there's a lot of interaction between these floaties and the actual object itself, and they're flying off and all kinds of stuff is going on there. So it just makes the scene a little bit more interesting. So yeah, that's it, and hopefully you will end up with a result like this. And you know, it's a good starting building blocks for creating that kind of imagery. I'm sure we can go a lot further than we have in this, but it's yeah, like I said, it's a good starting point. Anyway, I'm going to shut up rabbiting on now. As usual, check out the website digitalmeat.uk. You can follow Digital Meat on social media as well, Facebook, Google Plus and Twitter. Those links will be in the description. And also, if you want to help Digital Meat not fade into the night, check out my Patreon page. It will really help me out. There'll be a link for that on screen during the outro. Okay guys, thanks for listening. Bye.